Mi presento, sono Riccardo Rami,
seems to be more and more difficult. My name is
Riccardo
Rami. I am here on behalf of Arturo Garanzini and Fondazione Palazzo Strozzi, and I am here on behalf of Garanzini, who is also curator of the exhibition Reaching for the Stars, which is going on at Palazzo Strozzi. It's a large exhibition dedicated to contemporary art, which is told as it is narrated by the Fondazione Sandretto Re del Baudengo, one of the most important foundations in Italy that promotes contemporary art. Today's panel, GONOGO, is part of the exhibition, not so much as a side event, but rather as a starting point, a further starting point, a further way to discuss and understand the work in the exhibition that is GONOGO by Goshka Macuga, which is located in our courtyard. Without much ado, I would like to start this panel, and I would like to start by thanking all the speakers who are here today. I think it's a very stimulating opportunity to have a conversation and about going, not going, stay, not stay. We're going to be extremely stimulated by this conversation. So first of all, let me thank Baifin Group SDA, which is an historic part of our Fondazione, which has been supporting our project with very much long-sightedness, not only in terms of prestige and image, but also sharing our principles. So the partnership with Baifin is essential to promote more and more projects, and today's panel is an example of the vision we share about the future, about our considerations about the future. So I give the floor to Mr. Nicolai, who represents here the Baifin Group.
Good evening, everyone. Gruppo Baifin is extremely proud to support Fondazione Palazzo Strozzi. For the third year consecutively, we are the Foundation Committee's partner. It's a true and ever-increasing honor to attend initiatives such as this, Go or No Go. Our sector, the energy sector, obliges us to adopt a multidisciplinary approach. One that increase awareness in tackling ongoing social, cultural, and technological transformations. We take this opportunity to thank you for providing us with new and insightful perspectives. Thank you.
Grazie Beatrice, grazie davvero. E ora come ulteriore saluto introduttivo a questo incontro,
welcome to this meeting, I give the floor to Irene Calderoni, the curator of the Fondazione Sandretto Re del Baudengo, which is the soul of this exhibition, because everything was possible thanks to Patricia's role and the collaboration with Fondazione Sandretto Re del Baudengo. Maybe we should in particular thank a person here, Fondazione Strozzi, and this person is Irene, so I would like to give her the floor, and then we start with the panel. Thank you very much for these very nice words.
Thank you, of course, to everyone for being here. It's been, it's been, as Riccardo said, a very important moment for us to project, to organize, and so it's, after we opened the show back in March, we have been working on this moment, on this meeting, so it's especially important for us to be here today. As Riccardo said, I work as chief curator at the Fondazione Sandretto Re del Baudengo in Turin, where we also have a foundation, a space, we organize exhibition, we produce projects. We have this collection which is presented and travels also in different institutions, like on this special occasion. And we are also an institution really allied with artists in order to make things possible, to make projects possible. And I think it's especially symbolic that through this collaboration with Palazzo Strozzi, also we committed to commission and produce a very ambitious new project by the artist Goshka Macuga. The occasion of this exhibition is an anniversary. We organized this exhibition also on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the collection, which was started at the beginning of the 90s by Patrizia Sandretto Baudengo. So in a way, it's a show that recalls a story, which recounts a story, and interconnects this story with the history of art as it developed through the last 3 decades. So also structurally, the exhibition tells this story, and it's chronologically structured. But it was important for us that this occasion was not only about a nostalgic view or a historical view, but it has that it had a take on the present. And we did this through the help and through the vision of Goshka Macuga. So the exhibition starts and ends with the rocket, with GONOGO, as a commitment to also the future of this collection, because of course it's a dynamic project that not only started 30 years ago, but still goes on, still looks forward. And it's especially symbolic because this work talks to the present, is embedded in the present, in the conversations that today will be developed, but also looks into the future, of course, of humanity as a whole. Our conversation, our collaboration with Goshka started many years ago, back in 2009, when we first worked together on the occasion of her project for the Venice Biennale. At the time, Goshka conceived and realized an amazing project, which nowadays is in the collection of Fondazione Sandretto Baudengo, a monumental tapestry titled Plus Ultra, which, like a stroll, embraced the monumental columns of the Venice Arsenale. And I see a lot of connections with the work which we presented now in Palazzo Strozzi. Of course, the monumentality. Goshka is an ambitious artist, and you can tell by the size, by the sheer size of the work. But of course, monumentality also in another sense, because of course it has to do with the scale of our gaze, but it has also to do with the idea of celebrating something, of commemorating something. And in fact, Goshka will tell you better that the work was originally conceived, GONOGO was originally conceived to be a monument, even on a temporary base, but still, embracing the idea of monument. And monumentality also connects to the idea of propaganda, which is also another main topic of the work of Goshka, which was addressed in Plus Ultra, but I think is relevant also to what we are talking nowadays, because also space talk has this connection to the idea of promoting the idea of progress, the idea of technology advancement. So also has a political, possible political instrumentalization. I don't know if this word exists in English, but I say it anyways. And so this idea of propaganda as it connects to monumentality, I think, is very important in both projects. And finally, the idea of exploration and limits. Plus Ultra was conceived as a threshold, as a door, as a portal, and it evoked the historical idea of the limits of the known world. It was about what was known and what was beyond that limit, and the idea of exploration. In all, it's also ambivalent and problematic issues as it related to the idea of colonialism, of conquering, of going forward in order to get something more, get something new. And of course, this talk, this discourse really is relevant also in relationship to space exploration, because today we will also discuss about what it means to go into space in order to conquer. Last aspect of the artistic practice of Goshka that I think is very relevant to what we are doing today is the ambivalence between the idea of exploration and going into space as an heroic, individualistic endeavor, and a space for communal thinking and communal reflection, because one of the aspects that I think is, gave rise to this work is about seeing how nowadays this idea of going into space has been appropriated by a discourse that focuses also on the individuals, on these heroes of the new space age. But what I think is important, and it refers also to why we are here today, is about the fact that this should be a discourse that involves everyone, involves humanity as a whole, and has a very specific, sits specifically in a discourse of the commons. And so in this sense, what this work creates, the possibility to be together and to produce knowledge collectively and not individually, I think is at the core of our methodology, of our artistic practice, but it's what really this work raises. So thank you, Goshka, for organizing this, and to all our speakers for being here today to engage us in this discussion.
So thank you, Rene. It's time to delve into the panel right now. So first of all, I have to say that I'm here as a substitute. So because Ariane Koek, she's the curator of this panel with Goshka Macuga. We've been working together in the last months, and we were doing some researches together. We were discussing what kind of lecturers could be here with us in order to go more in depth through different perspectives. But unfortunately, she wasn't able to come today, so I'm here just to create connections between all the lecturers. So we are going to explore the subject from, let's say, 4 up to 5 different perspectives. The first one is going to be the artistic perspective. So Goshka, she's going to present her artwork. And then we are going to explore something more the sustainability side, the economical side, design and anthropology perspective, and then also a first-hand experience, because if everything goes well, we should have also Luca Parmitano from Houston, and it's something that we're really happy of having him, and he should be with us at around 8:30. Scusatemi, no, 8:30, 6:30. Scusate. So it won't last so long. So thanks again for being here, and Goshka, let's start from you.
Thank you. On. Yes. Okay. 2019, I was invited to submit proposal for a public sculpture for the 4th plinth on London's Trafalgar Square. I proposed to build a 15-meter-high rocket that would sit in the landscape like an arrow or a vector, symbolically connecting our planet to a space beyond. The political and cultural landscape of Britain in 2019, and especially its relationship with Europe, was changing rapidly, not only due to the mounting tension of Brexit, but also environmental problems that have been affecting the whole planet. Britain's separation from Europe was seen by some people, including myself, as a termination of the pact that aimed to share responsibilities with the rest of Europe to tackle such problems. The position of the 4th plinth sculpture would have contextualized the work within the history of the UK. As a key social political destination of London, Trafalgar Square's importance has never been more relevant. The coronavirus pandemic and the vast ecological, economic, and political crisis of 2020 have shaken the public awake to many social injustice, particularly towards Britain's history of systemic oppression. Numerous protests have taken place on Trafalgar Square and its surrounding area. At large, the revaluation of the UK's national heritage has been a broadly discussed topic through the country. The function of the public sculpture or the public space required a similar treatment and reassessment. I decided then to create a digital platform that would act as an extension of the sculpture and pay into the idea of shifting narratives around monuments, taking the concept of the rocket beyond its formal presence to a real-time, rolling content relevant to most poignant of events in our turbulent world. The development of my project took 2 years, with the main development of the proposal and the concept of the digital platform during the lockdown and the final presentation of the maquette in May 2021. The project was not selected for the fourth plinth at the final stage, which left me lost and disappointed after 2 years of my full engagement and huge efforts to make it happen. I felt that rockets are highly suggestive and symbolically rich icons that signify notions of monumental terrestrial change and man's relationship to cosmos. The rocket sculpture in context of Trafalgar Square was intending to create a dialogue with history, but perhaps there could be more fitting place to position the sculpture than that I thought. Few places came to mind, such as Venice, for example, but without set idea of particular location in Venice. In the 20th century, space exploration has been frequently used as a tool for political propaganda, involving advanced technologies by the most developed economic powers in the world. Technology and the space travel is a testament to our abilities and can be seen as inspirational, but at the same time is a subject of controversy, especially today when the world is going through such crises. Paradoxically, it is in recent years that space race has become reborn, with Global Space Agency announcing the most ambitious endeavors, such as crewed mission going back to the moon, exploration of further afield past Mars to Saturn's moons and Jupiter planned by NASA, JAXA, and ESA. And finally, the billionaire-founded space tourism dominating the news as wealthy civilians might be able to take off to space and view the Earth from space hotels. One can't help but think that these manifestations of power divert attention from growing inequality in the world to other agendas removed from the commitment to the human cause here on Earth. At the same time, we are part of the broader context, the context of the universe, and the exploration of our solar system is only an obvious need and desire. Our natural impulses are to explore and to go beyond. The technological development of the space program feeds back to our survival on this planet. Satellites are instrumental for our communication and observation of the changes taking place here. Asteroid deflection can prevent a potential disaster in advance, but if not, what are the options? If we wanted to escape to space, relocate to Mars, for instance, what would that take on the scale of global population? Who would be allowed to go, rich or poor? Would we have enough resources here on Earth to help us reach the point where we can move and live in space? What are the laws of using space? My sculpture visualizes these dilemmas we are facing. It embodies the fantasy and our reality, our aspiration and our failure. It responds to the opposites that define problematic areas of our culture and our language, and therefore create division rather than a union. This division is not only a social phenomenon, but something that we can identify with individually, every one of us. Go, no go, the title of the work, can be linked to a rocket launch status check performed before the liftoff, but in a broader sense, to a verification process that uses two boundary conditions. The test can only be passed when the go has been met and the no-go has failed. This process more correctly describes my intents behind building of the digital side of the sculpture, designed as a prototype by Hato Studio and accessible in this form as it is now at www.gonogo.space. The webpage over time aims to accumulate contents that would act as status check and hopefully will include participation from people working in different fields. Public participation and archival materials also. The defining of pros and cons are in the heart of our panel discussion and exchanges. Tonight's gathering is the initiation of this program. I would like to thank all the guest speakers for agreeing to take part in tonight's presentation. I would like to thank Palazzo Strozzi for organizing this session. I would like to thank Fondazione Sandretto Torrere Baudengo for the ongoing support of my art practice. It is only because of their involvement that this project could actually materialize. And of course, I would like to thank Ariane, who is sick and can't be here with us tonight for the structuring of tonight's talk. And of course, all of you for being here.
So now we are exploring different perspectives. So we are moving towards, I'm giving the floor to Professor Viola. And then in the second half of this meeting, we are going to have an open debate. So the first part, it's much more about every single presentation from different perspectives, and then we can go more in depth with an open discussion.
Please excuse my voice. I'm like, yes, I'm like this since this morning. Okay. So, okay, apart from that, I would like to thank you for inviting me, and thank you all for being here, attending this session. So my name is Nicole Viola, and I'm professor of Aerospace System Design at Politecnico di Torino. I'm also director of an international postgraduate program, master program in human space exploration, working with agencies, companies, and universities in France, UK, and Italy, of course, Politecnico. So, go or no go? And thank you. I would like to thank you, the artist, for this beautiful introduction. When I was trying to prepare this presentation, I was really trying to think what are the motivation that we have to follow to go to space. So why do we decide to go to space? And if there are any no-go. For me, not so many, but okay, let's see. So, okay, no? Where? So, the question, why we go? Why do we go? Why we explore? We explore, you benefit. This is the motto of European Space Agency, and this is a very significant one. So, as the artist was saying, of course, humans are very, let's say, they want to discover. There is a need to discover new words to unravel the mystery of the universe. And by discovering, they are really developing new technologies, pushing further the limits of technologies and science. But by doing that, so by doing and by developing technologies that astronauts or tourists or normal people will be using in the outer space, by doing this, we are also developing technologies that help humans already on Earth. So space is for everybody. It's not for scientists, not for technologists, engineers. It's for everybody. And space is for all. And space can, in fact, really help mankind reach the Sustainable Development Goals that we all know very well. Within this, there are many development goals. I would like just to pick two of those, to protect the planet and clean water and sanitation, just to give you some examples. So, protect the planet. Of course, the climate crisis is the most urgent crisis that we are facing, and we need to find solutions for that. And we can see how climate crisis is affecting our Earth. We have natural disasters, but also human-made threats that are putting all us at risks. And space can provide solutions for that. So space can help us protect the planet and protect the climate. How? Many, let's see, in many different ways. This is just an example. So this is an example of how space can help protect the planet, protect the climate. Climate reanalysis. What is this? Basically, if we think of Earth climate, we do have fewer and fewer observations of Earth climate if we go back into the past. And these observations are not evenly distributed on Earth. So what happens that we do not have any, we cannot reconstruct the overall puzzle. It is like if you look at the hand-hand side, like a puzzle where some pieces are missing. What is climate reanalysis? Climate reanalysis is combining the observations made in the past with climate models, new climate models developed by scientists to deliver a complete and robust, let's say, view of the past climate on Earth. So we have a complete reconstruction of what was the climate in the past years, decades ago. And this is extremely important because by doing this, we can understand how climate has changed in the past, how the temperature has changed. Now we are always talking about rising of the temperature. 1.5 degrees will be a disaster, yes, but what was the trend already decades ago? And this is, we can have this, so we can reconstruct the puzzle because of the climate reanalysis, because of satellites that are orbiting about our Earth. And this is an example, of course, of possibilities that we can have, the most obvious temperature change. So if you think at another sustainable goal, so clean water and sanitation, how space can help. Here is Antarctica, and a famous scientific site in Antarctica. What are we doing there? There are space scientists and space engineers that have been working there since 2005, something like that. Why? Because there are some water recycling technologies that have been developed for deep space exploration, so for human in space. And these technologies have been tested in a very hostile environment, which is pretty much like outer space. And this hostile environment is Antarctica. So these kind of technologies that are basically allowing us to recycle water from sink, showers, washing machines, laundry, all the water recycled. And this is under test since 2005, but something that I didn't know, it is also supporting one of the most famous, this technology, it's very technologies, is already supporting since 2020, one of the most famous tennis tournament, the French Open, that is going to start in, I think, in a few days in Paris. So they are using this technology. But space is a very hostile environment. So it's really our desire of development that is, let me say, that is pushing us to go there. This is just an example of what we need in space to guarantee the survivability of humans. We do not just need water. This is an example. We need more than 2 kilograms per person per day of water just to survive. We need more than 1.5 kilos of food. And we do of course need oxygen, about 1 kilo of oxygen per person per day in space. And at the same time, the human beings produces carbon dioxide. We need to get rid of carbon dioxide, and we produce waste that at a certain point, we need to manage and recycle. This is the most important word. But, so getting to the rocket, because how can we reach space? How can we get to space? How can we access space? We can access space through rockets, very powerful machine. I don't know if anybody of you watched this launch. It was an extremely powerful launch of the SLS, Space Launch System, Artemis 1 mission. It happened in November 2022, so last November. This is the Artemis program. NASA is one of the most important actor in the Artemis program, but also our agency, the Italian Space Agency, is deeply involved. And this powerful rocket is going to take us to the moon again. But, so this is just to say that, okay, it is all good since there. We are doing fantastic things, fantastic technologies with space, but we need to be careful because these technologies do not come without a cost. So accessing space is dangerous. It's dangerous because while we are trying to access space, we are, let's say, damaging our Earth. I will tell you how. So we need to be careful and work on that. Just some, let's say, numbers, some figures about this very powerful rocket, which is, I found this image very interesting. At the top, you see a comparison between the Statue of Liberty, and which is almost as high as this SLS launcher. So the launcher we are talking about are as high as the Statue of Liberty, and the mass is an unbelievable mass, is more than 2,000 tons of mass, capable of producing a thrust of 39, almost 40 millions of newtons. So we are talking of a big endeavor. These rockets are basically, they are moving through the atmosphere. So from the launch pad through are moving through all the layers of the atmosphere. The layers of the atmosphere are different. They have different properties in terms of pressure, temperature, and so on. So we move from troposphere, stratosphere, mesosphere, up to the so-called Kármán line, which is 100 kilometers high. And while they are moving through the atmosphere, they are emitting chemical emissions, chemical species. And these chemical species that are emitted are changing the chemistry of the atmosphere, so are changing our atmosphere, and they might be harmful. They might cause serious impact at local level, damaging life species or air quality. so at the level of the spaceport. And they can, of course, have an impact on climate too. So while we are trying to protect the climate, we are producing a bad effect on climate too. So we need to be careful on that. And some other figure just to let you know what are these chemical species that we are emitting. Not so many different from our cars, but of course, the atmosphere is different at this altitude. Anyway, we have water vapor, we have carbon dioxide, we have nitrogen oxides that are one of the first reasons for ozone depletion, the whole of the ozone that we have been talking for so long. But this is just a comparison, you know, and what do you have to get from this picture? Okay, we have different chemical species. We, as order of magnitude, we are emitting more than 1 kilos of chemical emissions per each kilos of propellant that we burn. So we are emitting a bit more than we burn. And in terms of numbers, here we have the famous and, to me, one of the most fantastic launcher ever, the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle, in the diagram with the bars, you have kind of, just as an order of magnitude again, more than 2,000 tons of emission, chemical emissions in the atmosphere throughout the trajectory, more than that. And I found that the picture on the right quite interesting. You are comparing there the emissions from the launchers to the emissions that we have from aviation, because you might be aware that also aviation is creating some problems, and we are talking a lot of sustainable aviation. So, but still the emissions from the launchers are huge. We are talking about 23 times the carbon dioxide emission that we have with a 737, so a kind of 200 seats civil passenger aircraft, and 170 more nitrogen oxide. So we need to be careful. We have, of course, many more airplanes. The fleet of airplanes aviation is huge compared to those of the rockets, but if we are going to increase launches, we are going to become equal to space travels are becoming equal to aviation, to our aircraft. So we need to be careful. And okay, I wish to thank you for your attention.
So now it's time to give the floor to Mattia Pianorsi.
Thank you, good evening. Thank you for the invitation. I am Mattia Pianorsi. I am a researcher at SDA Bocconi School of Management, specifically at the Space Economy Evolution Lab, which is a research center that studies the space economy. Previously directed by Professor Andrea Sommariva, who unfortunately passed away 2 years ago. Right now, it is managed by Professor Simonetta Di Pippo, former director of the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. At Bocconi University, I am even assistant professor of infrastructure and project finance and investment banking. And 1 year ago, I was space economy expert for the Minister Colau at the Italian government. And of course, I am space passionate. So right now, I would like to talk to you about maybe the boring part of the space sector, which is the economy, maybe numbers, you know, all this stuff, maybe boring, but in a sense, this gives us a little bit of a perspective about the space sector and the overall space economy. So I would like to make a distinction, first of all, between the two, because the space sector is the value generated by space companies in terms of selling space goods and services, while the space economy is even much bigger. For instance, all the users of satellite services, they have value added by using, for instance, Earth observation, navigation, weather forecasting, and this usage creates innovation in these companies, so a sort of value added. So if you can actually estimate this value added, it's quite impossible. The OECD is trying to do this, and even in the United States, you have a much more value of the space economy. So right now here in these slides, you can see how we are going ahead. So we started with the low Earth orbit with satellite services, for instance, navigation, Earth observation, telecommunication. We had the chance to sell these services to government, businesses, consumer, and these are companies funded by investors, so private investors, while the space sector historically was led by governments. If you think about the Apollo programs in the 60s and all the years that came after this, everything was funded by governments. Right now, actually, we have some commercial activities. We have the interest of private capital. It is quite new. This new space economy, like everyone is calling the space sector right now, so it's a different paradigm. And we are even go ahead. For instance, in low Earth orbit right now, we are doing private space stations. You know that in 2028, 2030, the ISS, the International Space Station, will be decommissioned. So the United States financed 4 projects to create private space stations. And you would say, but what we are going to do with private space stations in low Earth orbit? Yeah, there will be a lot of opportunities there, for instance, microgravity research, and I will talk about it later on. Another interesting thing is the space solar power. Now that we are going through the energy transition, climate problems, and et cetera, we are looking for renewable energy sources, you know? And the space solar power could be one of them. Maybe we are not going to complement, the energy that we need nowadays. It could be a collateral resources of energy free, basically. I mean, without emission, without anything. Because you put a satellite in orbit, it collects the energy from the sun, retransmitting it through microwaves to Earth, and without interference of atmospheric interferences such as clouds and whatever. So differently from solar panels here on Earth, this could be actually more efficient, you know? And so this could be another big, opportunity that we have. Together with the in-orbit logistics, there are companies right now, they plan to do in-space manufacturing and assembly. Instead of bringing materials from Earth, actually you create your own elements, components, and even structures in space. And this would be very useful for the lunar exploration, which is a little bit more ahead. And why lunar exploration? This is another great question everyone asks. So why we are going to go there? We have many problems here on Earth. Well, from lunar exploration, we will learn a lot. Specifically, not only to be there according to space agencies programs permanently as humans, but even to have spin-out technologies to bring back on Earth. And later I will do some examples. So this is a really short but big picture of what we are going to do in the next years. So right now, the space sector globally, it's not very, big. We are talking about 386 billions in 2021. If you think that the GDP of Italy is 1.6 trillion euros, the space sector value is very, very tiny. And actually, if you look at the bottom of the slide, the majority of the values is coming from satellite services and specifically the communication. All the broadcasting that we have around the world can rely even on satellites. So the majority of the value is coming from there. And of course, if you see on the top left of the pie chart, the majority of this funding is coming from governments. So you see around you a lot of buzz telling that the space sector is going commercial. Yes, it is, but public funding still play a big role here. even if there are some changes in this paradigm that we will see a little bit later. And as I said before, another big opportunity that maybe some investors have seen in the last years is that space could be actually commercial. So we have seen before that we have some segments that actually are commercial beyond the public fundings. Some investors, especially in the United States, started to see this opportunity. And in the last 10 years, in 12 years, we had something like 268 billions of dollars invested in the space sector, which is an unprecedented amount of capital compared to the past. It's still a little bit tiny compared to, for instance, all the capital invested around the world, but it's a start. And even this can signal to the world that not only governments, not only companies like SpaceX or Elon Musk or Blue Origin of Jeff Bezos, but even private capital is believing in this, not new sector, but in this new way to do this business or this activity in general. And you see that on the bottom right of the slide, you see that some investors are even putting money on those companies looking for exploration activities. We are talking about moon activities. So it's quite interesting, you know. Without any revenues in the beginning of these companies, these investors are putting money there. Just to mention this, multiple investors, even in the United States, when we talk to them, they didn't do any exit from their investments. It means that they invested, but they didn't sell that stake in the corporate, so they didn't make any money so far. And this is another quite interesting signal. I mean, they really believe on it, and they are all space passionate. I can assure this to you. But unfortunately, when these space companies try to make a step ahead and they go to the financial market, something is going wrong. As you can see from the table, in the last year, all companies listed, especially in the United States, they didn't perform very well. You see, they lost a lot of money, actually, maybe because they listed through a very special vehicle called SPAC, maybe a little bit speculative, but just to let you know that maybe all this buzzing around the commercial space is starting to reveal the little bit of hype that it got in the last few years. You know, starting with Elon Musk in 2002, with these billionaires, Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, they put a lot of money. I mean, they are doing actually good stuff, but in the end, not all the companies can actually compete right now because the amount of the market is small right now. So maybe you can experience even these crashes. And maybe it means that the financial markets are not ready to get listed companies and so to give this amount of money to grow so far. We will see in the next years. But maybe...
3,
yeah,
2,
sorry.
1. Liftoff of the Falcon 9.
Vehicles pitching downrange.
Stage 1 prop is nominal. Stage 1 entry startup. Stage 1 is transonic. Stage 1 landing we're in startup. Stage 1 landing leg deploying.
Falcon 9 has landed.
I mean, did you see that? It was impossible some years ago to do this. This is actually, like Elon Musk said, he said, when you take an aircraft and you go around the world, it's not like that when you get off the aircraft will be thrown away. So you will utilize again the aircraft. And so he applied the same reasoning to the rocket science. Basically, I mean, so in my experience, maybe Professor Viola can say it differently, but in my experience, I never experienced someone that could be reused the first stage of the rocket, like he did. Just to say that during the last 20 years, space companies tried to even be more efficient compared to the past. There were some changes in the paradigm of space agencies. For instance, NASA in 2006 made the commercial crew cargo program to basically give competitiveness in the space sector. You know, before they put a lot of money, they paid even for the last cents of the cost of the product. So it wasn't actually so competitive, the market, right? So they changed the paradigm, and they started to say, well, if you want to do this, I will give you 100, for instance, euros to do that. You have to do this product up to 100 euros. If you experience more costs, it's up to you. I mean, you will pay for this. And this has actually made some changes even in the perspectives of space companies, specifically for the entrepreneurs. They started to reducing maybe costs that before maybe some companies didn't want to do this because they were unsure that NASA or maybe space agencies could pay for this. So they started to reduce costs, to make innovation, for instance, in processes, in products, and this is one of them, in organization. SpaceX, for instance, decided to basically internalize all the manufacturing of the components up to the 70% compared to other competitors. In Europe, for instance, Ariane with the Ariane 6 is our launcher, together with Vega in Italy. They have a very distributed supply chain. So, you know, different models, different way of thinking. And right now, SpaceX is the leader around the world of space launches. But just to say that, yeah, this is some data about the improvements that they made in terms of launch cost. But just to say that this is not enough. There was this first part where space companies were able to make efficiencies, to make cost efficiencies, to innovate actually, compared to the past. And this made happy actually space agencies, for instance, NASA and ESA, but this is not enough. What space companies need to do in the future is to innovate their business model. They need to understand how to commercialize these innovations that they made in the past in private markets, not only selling anymore to public institutions, so governments, but even to private markets. And this is the real point and challenge, and maybe the explanation of the crashes that we saw in the financial markets right now. At least this is our idea. And this is not easy at all, because there are a lot of challenges here. But if you look at the graph, the space companies, the new space companies right now, they are between the early growth and the expansion. They can actually have the opportunity to grow. They have the opportunity to make actually grow this sector, but they need to change attitude. They need to rely on what they have innovated in the past to sell products and services right now, here on Earth, maybe even in other potential markets. It's very difficult to explain right now because the time is constrained, but happy to discuss about it. So just to go back to the main actually questions of this conference and nowadays, I would say that I am biased because for me, we should go to space, definitely. Of course, we should not go there if we are going to go for war reasoning. So you know that space is very connected to defense and security. You know that rockets can be utilized as missiles. Satellites can provide many, data about countries, about people. We saw this for Ukraine war, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you are going to go in space to make war, this is actually not the way to go. On the other hand, the way to go is, of course, a geopolitical way, because space could be a foundation for cooperation around nations. And the ISS was actually an example. Russian and Americans together to create the space station in orbit. Science and technology, Professor Viola showed you before what could be the achievements by utilization of space services, for instance, Earth observation navigation. In agriculture, and specifically in viticulture, there is here, not far from here, a company that is utilizing Earth observation to predict when to harvest grapes, to make the wine. So optimizing even the fertilizer and utilization of water. So think about it. And general benefits on Earth. If you think, you could imagine why we are going to the moon. Well, if we want to even to utilize the resources on the moon, we should be able to do some technological innovations. For instance, in mining plants. These mining plants should be even so tiny, but even flexible to go around the lunar surface. Rio Tinto, one of the biggest oil and gas companies around the world, and mineral companies around the world, told me once, if you would be able to get this mini plant, flexible plant here on Earth, we could save a lot of environmental costs, because every time that we are going to, to create a mining plant here on Earth, to transport all the components, we create big roads, big ways, and we disrupt the environment. So if we are able to take this technology, actually utilize for the moon here on Earth, we could save a lot of, we could have environmental savings and social savings as well. Just to give an example. Thank you.
So now we are really happy to introduce Luca Parmitano from Houston. So we were finally able to connect with him. So thank you for being with us, Luca Parmitano. And he's a colonel, Italian astronaut in European Astronaut Corps for the European Space Agency. He was selected as an ESA astronaut in May 2009. And Parmitano is also a colonel and test pilot for the Italian Armed Force. So we are discussing about the space, and finally we have someone who experienced the space. So thanks for being here, and we have a couple of questions. We know you have a very limited time to share with us, and we have a couple of questions that we would like to start from. And so we were discussing about human beings experiencing space. So could you tell us physical and mental limitation of being in space due to the fact that the human body is not designed for it?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me. It's the first time that I participate to your program, and it's always very interesting for me to meet different people, to talk to different people. You used a word that I really tend not to use too much, and it's the word limitations. I wouldn't talk about limitation. I would talk about maybe challenges or learning opportunities for us as humans. Because yes, it's true, we did not evolve on planet Earth to live in an environment that is in micro G or weightless, but certainly our body has evolved to quickly adjust to many different situations. You don't have to go to space to experience that. If you are a speleologist and you explore underground, you live for months for weeks or months in a place that is completely isolated and with only artificial light other than the total blackness. There are people who spend several days or months underwater in an environment that is technically alien. So our body is really capable to adjust. Space is not different. It offers us an opportunity to adjust to something that's completely different. In our case, we're talking about microgravity or weightlessness. From a physical point of view, there are several challenges, and especially for long duration flight, which is the kind of flight that I experienced. For those in the public who never heard of me or of the International Space Station program, our expeditions in general last around 6 months. I participated in 2 increments, so for a total exactly 366 days. So I spent 1 leap year in orbit, and the first time was about 160 days, the second time a little over 200 days. And in both cases, there are changes that happen physically to your body. The biggest challenge is how to keep our osteomuscular capabilities up to speed so that when we come back to the Earth, we haven't degenerated in a way that cannot be compensated in the future. Specifically for the bones, if we spend 6 months in orbit without doing anything, we would come back with a real serious case of osteoporosis. There was one case where one astronaut came back with a bone density loss of about 26%. So basically, he came back after about 6 months with the bones of an 85-year-old man. So in the past 20 years on the International Space Station, we have developed systems that let us exercise every day, about 2 hours every day, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, in order to keep our bodies healthy. We have to stimulate our osteomuscular systems, so we lift weights. We do this thanks to an amazing machine that through a series of levers and resistive devices can let us perform heavy lifting up to 300 pounds or 150 kilos and in the same motions that we would perform on the ground. We also have a bicycle trainer, slightly different. It doesn't have a seat, it doesn't have handles because we don't need them in orbit. We just float and pedal, and that's excellent for cardiovascular exercise. We also have a treadmill, and the only difference is that it's attached to the wall, so we run horizontally rather than vertically. It doesn't make any difference to us, and we need a harness to keep us stable on top of the treadmill. We use these devices to keep ourselves healthy, otherwise our body again would degenerate very quickly. The second question you ask is about our mental or psychological training or challenges. I would say that that's taken care of during the selection phases. If you want to be an astronaut, if you have worked throughout your career thinking that maybe you want to be an astronaut one day, you probably have the desire to live in such environment. You're probably not claustrophobic. Otherwise, it would be really challenging to get inside a spacecraft, especially one like the Soyuz with very, very limited volume. And then living inside a constrained volume like the International Space Station for months at a time would be challenging. So I would say that most people that try to come into this field have already come to terms with those kind of psychological challenges. I would say that one challenge that, from a psychological point of view, is needs a little bit of training is the interaction with people. Astronauts are very high performing people. However, when you put them together inside a constrained environment for months at a time, there will be tension, there will be issues that come up, and the ability to talk and solve those problems together, especially in a team that is very high performing, is not immediate. I was the commander of Expedition 61. I was commander for about 4.5 months on the International Space Station. One of the biggest challenges for me was to keep an open communication between my team members, but also I think I had to tailor my communication, my individual communication towards each crew member, so that it would really invite that openness, that two-way communication, but also multi communication towards the other team members in order for everybody to perform to its maximum capabilities. We don't have specific training for that. I think it's a matter of experience. It's a matter of sensibility in a way. We do have psychological support. We can always call down on the ground to talk to psychologists that are experienced in the field and see if they have any wisdom that they can share to us. But of course, in the end, it's us operators on orbit that need to do it. I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, definitely you did. Thank you so much. I think if you have a couple of more minutes, we could ask something more. Thank you so much. And it would be something more personal that we were discussing with the lecturers before the start of this panel. So do you identify yourself more to the space or to the planet Earth?
Well, that is an interesting question. and I hope I don't disappoint you, but I don't see why I would have to make that choice. Meaning, I identify as a human being. That's the only thing that I really identify as human, and then everything else that you want to put inside the container is up for grabs. I can be at the same time a father, a husband, an athlete, an astronaut, and an earthling. All those things are not in opposition to each other. They are complementary. I love flying. That's my previous life, my previous career has always been in flying. It doesn't make me less of an earthling because I love to see the planet from the atmospheric height. It doesn't make me less of an earthling because I've had the chance to see planet Earth from 400 kilometers of distance. I can tell you this, that when I was on the space station and I had the chance of looking at the planet, specifically, I come from an island. I come from Sicily, from a relatively small city in Sicily. And I do remember very clearly the first time that I saw my hometown from orbit. It came up as a surprise. We were flying from the equator. I was taking pictures of storms across the equator in Africa. And then as I was done with those pictures, I looked up and I saw Crete and Cyprus. And so I realized that to my left, to the east, to the west, I would see Italy. And then right there, it was in a silhouette. The Mediterranean was completely a golden color because of the light of the sun, and Sicily was this black, perfect silhouette. And at that moment, it was the beginning of the summer of 2013, the very first time that I saw it. My whole family, everything that's dear to me, the most important people in my life, they were all there. And I never felt so far and so close at the same time. So being in space doesn't take me away from planet Earth the same way it doesn't take my humanity away. So those things are not in opposition. They are all just complement to each other.
Thank you so much. Very touching, very personal. I think we have to thank you again for this time, for your availability, and we hope you the best. I don't know what to say. I mean, I guess you're so busy, and we are going back to the guest to explore more in terms of anthropology, and your intervention, your speech was really much into the relationship between man, women, human beings, and an environment which wasn't made for them, but can be explored and can be part of our future. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. If I may close with something, it's not that my speech was about humanity or relationship. Is that when you think about human space flight exists from the 60s, and we have had, the first thing that went to orbit was a man-made object, human-made object, the Sputnik. To this day, we are still sending probes and rovers to distant planets, distant moons, and even beyond the solar system. But when you think about human spaceflight, humanity is at the center of that. So it's in its nature, human spaceflight is a unique mix of science, technology, and exploration, but really it has humanity at the center of it. So that's what makes it so exciting, so enticing. And I believe that even though we are exploring and pushing our limits to go as far as we can beyond the Earth orbit, beyond the Earth-Moon system, and beyond the planetary systems, I think that sense of exploration will never be accomplished until we put humanity on the surface, and that's always going to be a dream and an horizon that we want to traverse and we want to explore. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you so much.
I hope I can give you something from that. All the best, and I hope you have a great continuation of your event.
So next time you're coming to Italy, we will wait for you at Palazzo Strozzi.
Very happy.
Florence.
I've been to Florence many times. It's one of the many places that I really love in Italy. I used to come to Florence from the Air Force Academy, about 3 hours down the road in Naples, and I have lots of friends and lots of amazing memories of Florence. So I'd be very happy to come and join you.
Okay, this is a formal invite.
All right.
Okay, we'll be waiting for you here.
My formal availability.
Grazie mille.
A presto, buona serata.
So very nice, and this is a special occasion, and thanks again to Goshka for creating this connection with an astronaut, an Italian astronaut. We have to stress this. We are so proud of that, and living and working not just on this planet, but also somewhere else. So now I'm giving the floor to Jane Davis for the final presentation, and we're moving towards anthropology.
Hi everyone, I'm really honored and happy to be here, so thank you for having me. I'm Jane Davies. I am a space anthropologist, and I'll tell you what that is in a second. And I'm from Canada, FYI, if anyone's curious what that accent is. So I'm just going to quickly go through what anthropology is, so we kind of understand, we're on the same page. So essentially, anthropology is the study of humans and human culture. It was born out of sort of colonialism, so it is important to acknowledge that. There is a pretty problematic history of representing indigenous people as savages and other problematic notions, but we have come quite a long way since then, and there's now this detailed focus on objectivity, reflexivity, and ethics. So briefly, objectivity is where we try to make sure we're portraying a culture with an objective viewpoint, so just what we observe and putting that onto paper, not adding any judgment. Reflexivity is understanding our own positions as researchers when we are going into a community and understanding any power dynamics that could be at play. And then ethics is a big building block of anthropology in this era in terms of ensuring that we have ethical clearance to go where we're going and not affect a community negatively, positively, just go in, observe. So space anthropology is a subdiscipline. Although it sounds very futuristic, it's been around for about 20 years, but it's kind of been quietly simmering away, focusing on anything to do with space. So that could be looking at science fiction, that could be looking at the infrastructure and the material culture of outer space, and especially how it affects how we understand ourselves and our cultures back on Earth and as we go into the cosmos. So my research was looking at 3D printing in space during my master's at UCL in London. And on the side here, you can see the astronaut Butch Wilmore holding the first ever 3D printed object, or 3D printed tool from space. That was back in 2014, and it's a very niche study, but I essentially looked at this tool to understand how it's played a part in the narrative of colonization off Earth, because unfortunately there's still the same language we use as part of the colonial era of going and settling in the Americas, for example, as well as in outer space. And you can see also in the render from NASA of a 3D printing robot on the moon. So this is not a real thing yet, but that is where we're sort of headed in terms of the space sector, is looking to settle on the moon using the resources that are there, so the lunar regolith or lunar soil, and making a 3D printing feed out of it and printing settlements before we even get there. So looking at this, the sort of pros and cons of us going into space. As my other panelists have mentioned, there's obviously this important aspect of it being something that goes beyond geopolitics when we go to space. Some astronauts have gone to space and come back down and said they were shocked that they didn't see the lines of borders of different countries like they do see on a map. So they kind of expected to see these boundaries that we've drawn, but they aren't there when you go to space. Space doesn't really care about that. And also, as we can see with the picture of the astronauts and cosmonauts, the International Space Station is a place for collaboration, and as my previous panelists mentioned, it's also something, it put an end lightly to the Cold War in terms of the Soviet Union and the United States collaborating. So we can see positives in terms of this this ability to bring people together as one in outer space and not focus on these sort of geopolitics that we have on Earth. However, in recent history, in the last year or so, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we can also see that the ISS and space is sort of used as a stage for geopolitics to play out in terms of wanting to extricate astronauts or not cooperate between countries. So one very fascinating area within space anthropology that I don't focus on myself, but is looking at the interpersonal relationships in microgravity. So things like trying to communicate and understand someone's emotions when their face is, the blood is rushing differently in their face from microgravity. There's subtle facial expressions that you can't really mimic in microgravity that are just affected in that way. And even if we think about giving someone a hug when you're floating perpendicular like this astronaut is, or basic human functions that we do every day, how those change when we go to space. And especially when we consider coming from our own different cultures and our own countries where we've learned to do, even the hand movements I'm doing now are something I've learned from my own cultural background, but those might change in space because of how I would react in microgravity. So it's kind of this shift in how we are as cultural beings change in space. And of course, as the previous speaker mentioned, there are problems with bone density and muscle tissue when we go to space. So it is important to consider those aspects of human culture and human bodies as well. So when we look at culture of space, it's important to think about what's going to happen as we go forward. So let me just quickly. In terms of what will be the product of us going into space, as there are only a few countries who are in the space programs, it's important to think about who is setting the tone for the culture of space in terms of building the built environment, so the ISS, and who is setting the tone. Even if we look at how the most used language of the space sector is English, that's already quite excluding a number of nations who are trying to collaborate and cooperate in space. So bearing those things in mind, we need to understand how we're going to be able to develop as people and as collaborators in space. One thing it's also important to note is how the space infrastructure affects humans on Earth. So this is the proposed 30-meter tall telescope, which was going to be, in 2014, I believe, was proposed to go on a mountain in Hawaii, but this is a sacred mountain to the indigenous people there. So since this proposal, they've been protesting, and it still has not been built. But this points to a larger issue in terms of how in the ideas of progress and science moving forward into space, and space sciences, that often a lot of different cultures and narratives are left out of the conversation and don't have a voice within it. And I think it's important to consider a holistic view of the space sector, not just from our own ambitions for economic growth or for scientific advancement, but also how the people relate to space that don't have loud voices because of previous oppression or because of ongoing being suppressed by sort of higher powers, especially looking at indigenous communities. So, equality in space. We often kind of look to space as this beautiful thing that we're all going to be equal. There's no indigenous people on Mars or on the moon that we have to worry about colonizing. However, it doesn't mean that that's going to be straightforward. As has been mentioned already, there are some key big players like Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, who are all white Euro-Western people. And they are the ones who are able to sort of set the pace and also afford to go to space. And with the growing space tourism industry, it still does have a pay point that you have to be able to have a certain socioeconomic status to enter. We're talking about hundreds of thousands to be able to go to space, and that's not something that everyone can do. So equality, I'm optimistic that we can get there, but at this time, we're not quite there yet. I just want to touch also quickly on resource utilization in space. And I'm just going to quickly read this quote so you don't all have to read it. But this is part of the Outer Space Treaty that was drafted in 1966. So the exploration and use of outer space, including the moon and other celestial bodies, shall be carried out for the benefit and in the interest of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic or scientific development, and shall be the province of all mankind. Now, this is important because this is kind of the main legislation that has been passed with regards to space utilization, and that's from the 60s. It's been a few years since then, and also the sort of state of the space sector is very different than it was back then. This is referring specifically to countries and how they can utilize resources. Whereas now we're looking at private corporations and individuals who are able to kind of circumvent some of these laws and go around them just because they haven't been straightforward in saying who has rights to the assets in outer space. Especially with the renewed focus on going back to the moon, we've discovered there's ice on the moon, and ice can be turned into water, which is great because we do need water when we go off Earth, but more importantly, it can be split into hydrogen and oxygen. Oxygen for life support, great. Hydrogen can be used as fuel for rockets. So once that starts to happen, the moon can kind of start to turn into a bit of a gas station for going further from into Mars or into outer space, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That is promoting, advancement into the sector and advancement of humankind off Earth. But we do need to think about how, like this treaty is asking, how is that going to benefit all humankind, rather than just sort of line the pockets of people who are already billionaires on Earth. Just something to think about. So just in concluding, I want to kind of reflect on this image from NASA, which is a render of what settlements on Mars might look like. And honestly, to me, that doesn't look very appealing. I don't really fancy living there compared to, oops, sorry, wrong way, compared to this lovely blue marble. It's like, it's got, as the previous speaker was saying, it's got everything, everyone we've ever known, everyone we've ever loved, everyone we've ever hated, everyone ever thus far, although we've obviously had outposts on the ISS and we've traveled to orbit and the moon. That's kind of where we've all been and where we've all come from. So it'll be very interesting to see how humans advance off Earth. I don't think it is a bad thing to go off Earth. I myself wouldn't do it because I do get motion sickness, so I'm not going to get in a rocket. But yeah, I think for me, it's when the question is go or no go for space, I think it's go, but I think we need to consider, no, there we go. We need to consider not just the sort of economic advancements in technology and scientific, but also the human aspects and how those stand to change and affect people who are underrepresented. Thank you.
So we have 4 more questions, but I think we could just reduce to a couple of them to explore more something that has been discussed already. So there were some, for sure there's some overlappings, but we could start from these. Are there enough laws and regulations covering outer space, or do we need more? And if so, why and how?
I can jump in. I think it's a tricky question because I would say there's not enough laws and regulations, no. But I think there is an argument for once we start having more regulations, you can sort of stifle scientific advancement. At least that's the argument that I hear. Because if we start making things, they have to be one way, that can also prohibit more sustainable innovation if standards are very specific. But yeah, I think in terms, as I've talked about at length, I think in terms of laws governing supplies, materials, and especially space debris, which I don't think we've covered today. Yeah, because there's a big problem with debris in orbit and it being left there and causing damage to other satellites, which our entire banking systems and GPS work off of. So I think for me that's a yes.
Sorry, it's not improved. Okay, my voice still like this. But for the debris, which is a real problem, it is a real problem. There has been a law. I can't remember when was established, but I believe already a decade or two. That basically you put a constraint on your satellite that has to deorbit within, I don't know, after 25 years of the end of the operations. So your object, you put in space your object, but then after the end of life, it has to deorbit, which means that you need certain technologies, but this is a good thing because you will not have a dead, let's say, object there that is not doing any functions anymore, and it just deorbit and it burns through the atmosphere. So this is the only thing, but still we have a lot of problem with the debris, yes. With the mega constellations, which are good in a way, because the mega constellations, so many satellites orbiting about the Earth, and providing services like, I don't know, telecommunication, data rate, and high data rate, remote areas of Africa, whatever. But still, we are putting a lot of objects that can also not be so nice for astrophysics and for observations from Earth. Telescopes or... Yes.
So referring to relics in the outer space, who should be in charge of general control? Is anyone in charge of that? Or is it just a matter of countries?
Now, I just want to say that I am quite in agreement with the fact to regulate, especially if we go to the lunar surface and we don't start to do laws by a national point of view, like in the United States and Luxembourg. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I would like even to pose this question. I mean, the space sector with the debris and with other problems maybe it needs regulation, but are we sure that imposing regulation will constrain innovation? I mean, we have a lot of sectors here on Earth that are not regulated properly and cause a lot of environmental disasters and social diseases. And we are thinking to regulate a sector that is emerging after 60 years. And thinking about all the benefits that this sector is doing, of course, the propellant and all the questions that you posed, but regulation should be using to facilitate something, to give assurance that something can be done with the rules that everyone agrees on, but not to you know, Elon Musk is not doing this because he's waiting for regulations to come. He's doing this by himself, and he's doing something that anyone has done before, starting with Starlink and the Starships and whatever he has in his mind. So he asked to the FFA for, I mean, he put the satellites in orbit, and after the FFA gave him the grant to reduce the altitude from the surface of Earth, but he did it. And if we impose a regulation without actually thinking if it's facilitating the innovation, in my opinion, we are going in the wrong way.
Can I say something? Because what we said as well, we already talked about it. It's kind of question of looking at the ultimate goal and what it takes to reach that goal. And of course, I think that what is very positive is, of course, what comes in between. So what you're talking about, the development and all the technologies which come from this aim of the ultimate goal somehow are very positive. But I think that we are also at a place where we really are in a state of emergency. And I think that in any kind of circumstances or business, not having any restrictions, even if it's an emerging, growing economy, it's very problematic because we haven't got so much space to play around. You know, we have to really think of the limitations that are really getting greater and greater. So I can totally see the kind of potential and, of course, the idea of the kind of developments of technology and the feathering of the space program is amazing, but I think that leaving it without any limitation and laws is extremely problematic.
Okay, so shall we go or shall we stay? Thank you for being with us. Thanks, Goshka, and thanks to all the guests.